masterclass. It's your host, Illuminostic. And in this masterclass, we're going to talk about the history of ayahuasca. We're going to talk about different tribal histories and traditions around ayahuasca. We're going to talk about the pharmacology and the neuroscience, and we're going to dispel some myths, and I will relay stories of my own experiences. Excuse me. So it's going to be really interesting and very long. I think it'll probably take us quite a few hours. So maybe we'll do an hour tonight and some more hours. Hello from Boston. Over the next week or so, as I have time. I'm really busy right now. I want to thank all of you guys for your support lately. As you guys know, I've recently experienced a lot of healing myself via ayahuasca in San Pedro. I was more or less debilitated for a couple of years, and it's really remarkable how much the medicine helped me. I think I know why, and we'll get into all that. So let's start at the beginning with some history and some of the early encounters that I guess Europeans had with ayahuasca, and a little bit about how it works. So I am in Ecuador, and there are several tribes here, but the ones that are most well known for being associated with ayahuasca are the Shuar, the Kofan, and the Quechua. And those are the peoples that I have the most personal experience with, obviously because of where I live, but particularly the Shuar. And the Shuar have an extraordinarily deep knowledge of all the plants of the jungle, second only to maybe the Shipibo, and particularly with ayahuasca. And they will know the lineage of particular vines. There are several types that they'll use. There are different strains of ayahuasca. A lot of people don't know that Banisteriopsis caapi is not the only ayahuasca vine. There's also Banisteriopsis muricata, which is much stronger. People sometimes call it black ayahuasca. The leaf is very different. It's dark green, much smaller, and it has a silver underside. Very, very powerful. It's used a lot in Colombia. But so the Shuar lineages, they will know a particular vine, who it came from, what clan, and who it was passed down through for hundreds of years. Extremely detailed information about the vine and the history of the people that are connected to it. And it's all very relevant and important. They call it natem, or natema if it's Ashuar. And the mixture is almost never just ayahuasca and chalipanga, or ayahuasca and samiruca, or ayahuasca and chacruna. Speaking of chacruna, I'm going to make a quick divergence to tell you guys a story real quick. It's generally said that chalipanga is used here in Ecuador, which is Diplopterus cabrerina. It's a vine. The leaves contain a lot more DMT than Psychotria viridis, which is the chacruna vine, but it also contains 5-MeO DMT, and I much prefer it. But the other day I went to the market to pick up some plants from the Quechua woman that we get all of our medicinal plants from, and I was getting chalipanga, and she said, you know, this guy brought this chacruna. And I was a little bit confused because a lot of times the Quechua will actually just call chalipanga chacruna. But I was also getting chalipanga, so I was like, wait, what? What do you mean? And so she opened up the bag and it's full of chacruna. So I guess it's actually not necessarily true that they use chalipanga because there is no chacruna, because clearly there is chacruna. I posted some pictures of the leaves in the community posts, my page. If you're a subscriber, you can check that out. So yeah, the Shuar are the people that I have worked the most closely with, people that have learned from the Shuar themselves. Miguel Chiriop is a very well-known shaman he is Schwar, and I worked with him a lot recently. But let's back up and talk a little bit about my own personal history. A lot of you guys that follow my channel probably already have heard these stories, but for those of you that are new, I actually got involved with studying plant medicine and psychoactive substances in general at a very young age because of an accident, I'm assuming, on the part of the school librarians when I was in maybe like 3rd grade or something. I was very young. And there was a small book that's probably still available on Amazon called Flowering Plants, and it's very small, and it has a picture of a heavenly blue morning glory, which contains LSA, which is an analog of LSD. It's actually the first time that a chemical was synthesized in the laboratory before it was discovered in nature. And so I don't know why I grabbed this book, but it actually wasn't about just flowering plants. It was about datura, mandrake, henbane, ayahuasca, peyote, all of these different plants, and it also contained a lot of the lore. So I was just absolutely fascinated with this stuff. And looking back, I honestly think that there is something in our subconscious, or maybe it's possible that there's sort of a universal mind that sort of guides us throughout our entire life. And I feel like I was directed at that book at that young age, because these plants were going to play an extremely, hello Shane, very important role in my life. I grew up in very rough circumstances. There were several murders within 1 block of my house when I was a kid. My mom was severely mentally ill, and I didn't really know that the severity of it, I guess, until I was older and had some experiences with other people so that I could see it. My father had a lot of substance abuse issues. Turned out he wasn't even my father. So point being, I was very damaged. I had a lot of trauma. I was exposed to a tremendous amount of violence. And on top of that, from the earliest age that I can remember, I was absolutely obsessed with metaphysics and mysticism and, you know, the great questions of philosophy and existence. And so, you know, rather than playing Nintendo or doing whatever it is that, you know, 8 and 9-year-olds did, I was spending all my time contemplating these questions, and I intuited very early that these plants and substances like LSD would be sort of like a master key that would allow me to access the information that I was seeking. And it started with junior high school, reading, you know, Timothy Leary, who I still think is so undervalued, and it's really unfortunate. I think that he's being forgotten. A lot of people think he was a CIA agent and all of this stuff. If that's true, I'd really like to meet the CIA agent that was scripting Timothy Leary, because to this day I've never heard anyone speak of the psychedelic experience so profoundly and concisely. Leary, you know, if you have ignored him, I would strongly suggest you can check out one of my videos. I made a bunch of quotes set to some graphics. The Teachings of Dr. Timothy Leary, I think I called it. So Leary and McKenna and Huxley, and, you know, from there I got into the Joseph Campbell's mysteries and the Hermetic tradition, and all of that is really important and relevant because I feel that ayahuasca and other plant medicines served the indigenous people and the shamans that employed them extremely well, and they're obviously helping a lot of people, but they don't do everything. And, you know, I get a lot of flack for my syncretic approach sometimes because there are a lot of people that feel like we should be absolutely traditional. And I feel like there's a lot to be gained from this syncretic approach to studying the mysteries and understanding the Western occult tradition, and all of the things that they offer. And it's a little known fact that these entheogens actually were used in the mystery schools and still are to this day. I'll give you a hint that the acacia leaf that contains DMT, I don't know who the author was, you know. I only really thought about that book again because someone asked me how I got into all this stuff, and I remembered that, you know. So I honestly, I haven't Googled it. I haven't tried to track down that book and see what it was, but you know, maybe I can do that and put a link in the description later. It's a great little book though. And so all of that led to, you know, I wanted to understand their influences like Joseph Campbell, and I noticed that Leary and McKenna and Robert Anton Wilson, They had very deep knowledge of the sciences in general, especially psychology, physics, because understanding the fundamental structure of our reality is, you know, this is basically the approach of the mystery schools, and one of the reasons I value them so much. The idea that science and spirituality are mutually exclusive, I think, is ridiculous, and I really think it's one of the great tragedies of, you know, modernity and the approach of a lot of the I don't want to say trendy, but, you know, the current climate in spirituality is sort of to reject science and to be very suspicious of it, and I think that's kind of the wrong idea. And so, yeah, that's basically an overview of, yeah, I mean, I've read Strassman, you know, all that stuff. I spent my entire youth just pouring through all of the psychedelic literature and, you know, studying the different forms of mysticism and all of that kind of stuff. So, ayahuasca, of course, always stood out to me. And the reason is that the reputation that it had, particularly in regards to these sort of unused capacities of consciousness like telepathy, precognition, remote viewing, that stuff really got my attention, and it's something I think that has been kind of neglected in the renaissance of ayahuasca, partly I think because people are hesitant to, it's like we're trying to reform the image of psychedelics. We're trying to sort of distance ourselves from the woo element of it. And I think that that's kind of a mistake. In fact, telepathy was proven in experiments using ayahuasca in the mid-60s by PhD medical doctor, two of them working together, Houston and, oh my gosh, what is the name of the book? It's The Varieties of Psychedelic Experience by Masters in Houston, PhD, written in published in 1966. But, you know, we'll get to that. But I used to pour through books like One River by Wade Davis and The Serpent and the Rainbow. He was a student of Richard Evans Schultes, who was basically like the Indiana Jones of psychedelic plants. He got lost in the Amazon rainforest for like 12 years. Yo, man, I was thinking about you today, wondering where you've been. I haven't seen your name in the chat for a while. Good to see you there. So Richard Evans Schultes, he was a Harvard ethnobotanist. He kept a bucket of peyote buttons by his door, and the students could consume them and write papers to improve their grade. And this is in like the late 1930s, early 40s. And so, you know, there's just a remarkable person. He went into the Amazon basin and was probably one of the first modern intellectuals to experience ayahuasca. He said he never had visions, he only saw lines, but he really dedicated himself to documenting and studying and, you know, living with the indigenous people. He found a plateau in Peru where 99% of the flora contains some kind of psychoactive substance. So the grass contained DMT, you know, most of the mushrooms probably were psilocybes. Just really a remarkable life. And Wade Davis was one of his students, and he wrote a book called One River that was a huge influence on me. It was partly about Richard Evans Schultes' explorations in the Amazon and all of his discoveries. But in that book, he talked a lot about the anthropological record and the remarkable things that happened. And one of the stories that's always stuck with me was Sir Walter Raleigh, who was, I guess, an English explorer. And so there was this story from Sir Walter Raleigh's diary where he had been talking to a shaman in Peru, and the shaman said, "When I drink the vine, I can know anything." And so Sir Walter Raleigh said, "Well, tell me something that you couldn't possibly know." And the shaman said, "Your sister is dead." Hello, Andrew. And so she turned out to have died. And my further studies, I unearthed stories of anthropologists speaking about how the shaman knew about the Eiffel Tower and places in China and the Great Pyramids. And we're talking like, you know, turn of the century, 1900s, 1950s. There was no way these people had ever left the jungle. Barely contacted people. They had absolutely no way of knowing this information. And of course, since then, I have experienced time and time again remarkable instances of indisputable telepathy. I've received information from these entities. I've been able to confirm for myself experientially that that stuff all happens. And it's important even to our healing and to our growth spiritually, because in my experience and observation, exposure to this universal mind, as Aldous Huxley said, there is a reducing valve in our consciousness, and these entheogens turn off or turn down the filter and allow us to receive these signals from the universal mind. And when this is done, whether it's through meditation or you know, ayahuasca, or however it happens, head injuries even sometimes, exposure to this universal mind seems to have a very positive influence on us. We become people with more substance. We become more peaceful and have greater knowledge of ourselves. And so, you know, it's not just about experiencing these sort of psychic phenomena just for entertainment. It really is, I think, a part of our growth as a species to experience and expand the parameters of what's available to us to experience. So that in a nutshell are the main reasons that I've gotten involved with this stuff. Later I discovered that it was also about healing these profound traumas that I had from growing up in extreme poverty, surrounded by extreme violence, with mentally ill and drug addicted parents. But we'll get to all that. Do me a favor too, you guys, hit the like button, share, subscribe. We are demonetized, so if you appreciate these videos, we do appreciate your support. There is an email address where you can PayPal or Zelle, cryptocurrency you can send to our wallet address. We really do appreciate the support. You can also find a link to an email if you want more information about the retreats, the hermetic magic and plant medicine that we're doing in Ecuador all summer and into the fall. Okay, so that's the basic gist of it. So let's talk a little bit about the miracle of the existence of ayahuasca at all. Here in the Amazon, and actually just right down the river from where I'm sitting, maybe 5 hours, is a place called Yasuni National Park. If you Google it, you'll find conflicting assertions about where exactly the most biodiversity on Earth is, but Yasuni is definitely one of the contenders, one of the ones that's mentioned regularly, and I'm sure it's at least top 3. And one of the greatest varieties of that biodiversity is, of course, the plant life. There is a tremendous variety of plants here, and only so many of them contain DMT, and only one of them contains harmala, and it's a big, thick, woody, hard vine. And so the great question, the great mystery, or the beginning of the great mystery of ayahuasca is, how did anyone discover it in the first place? Because we have a process, we have ratios, a certain amount of the vine combined with a certain amount of the leaves. If you put too many leaves, it's going to be extremely overwhelming. You'll black out, you lose consciousness and not know what happened. Not enough, and you won't have visions. The DMT containing plants do nothing on their own, and the ayahuasca vine does have an effect on its own, but it's not really visionary, and there's a lot of vomiting. So usually if you are out in the jungle looking for food and medicine, and you encounter a plant that makes you vomit and other leaves that do nothing, you're not necessarily going to continue to experiment with these. So how it is that the indigenous people ever decided to, pound this vine to pieces and combine certain ratios of it with a certain amount of water and boil it for a certain number of hours and then reduce it, because if you just do that and drink it, you're going to have to drink a lot, not much is going to happen. So it really is interesting that it exists at all. And once again, bringing this dovetailing of science and spirituality back into the conversation, which I think is really important for us. You know, the depth of our understanding, we should not place limits upon it. And anything that happens in this material realm is going to have some kind of mechanistic basis. There is some way that things happen. And so when an indigenous person says, what, you don't talk to the jungle? When we ask them how it is that plants could have told them what to do with them, which is what they tell us, right? What the jungle told us. There have been studies on biophotons that almost definitely give us an answer. And that answer is that all DNA, or all tissue that contains DNA, emits these little packets of light called biophotons at a rate of about 100 per square centimeter per second. And it's been proven that these biophotons carry information that other DNA can understand. And my personal belief is that we have de-emphasized, devolved our ability to consciously interpret the signals that are coming through our DNA via these biophotons, because we've been living in concrete jungles. If something isn't necessary, you know, nature's very economical, it's very pragmatic, and it conserves. So if you're not, use it or lose it, simply, right? So we have not needed this capacity to receive the incoming signals in order to figure out what to do with all the plants around us and animals. So we have lost the ability to receive them. So in Western speak, we could say that it's very likely that what happened is that the indigenous people that are able to receive these signals from the DNA, their biophotons from these plants communicated with their DNA, told them exactly what to do, and that's how they know how to mix all of these plants. And it's not just ayahuasca. We have, you know, rapé. I just had some very nice rapé from Brazil made by the Yabanaba tribe. And it also requires very specific mixtures of plants with very specific processes, certain types of ash that have to be burnt in order to convert alkaloids into a psychoactive form. So there are very sophisticated methods of making these plants into viable medicines. And so it appears that we actually know how it is that people have been able to receive these signals. And we are reacquiring those capacities of consciousness, I think. In fact, the other day, my partner has been suffering from gastritis for quite some time, and I was just walking around the jungle, and I thought, Dr. Sandi, with a couple of drops of sangre de drago. So I tell her this, and then we go down to the Quechua market, and she tells, you know, one of the plant vendors what she's dealing with, and she says, Dr. Sandi, which is a latex from a tree that is cut and then it bleeds, and it's like a white, it's almost like Pepto-Bismol. The tree is actually pretty well known. It's used for lumber. Indigenous people actually make sort of cheeses out of it. It's a really, really useful, like multi-use plant, but it's actually regarded as one of the most valuable, if not the most valuable plant medicines in the Amazon rainforest by a lot of the tribes. And so sangre de drago is similar. It's a tree, you cut it, this latex comes out, and it looks like blood. Speaking of communication with plants, this is another aspect of it. Nature speaks to us through visual cues. Very, very simple examples of this, like arrow poison frogs. That, you know, the dart is rolled on the back of the frog and it'll bring down a bear, right? So there are more sophisticated expressions of this, and there are also things that you can learn, like often the antidote to a poisonous plant will grow within 50 meters of, for example, poison ivy in the United States. There's a little yellow flower that's always growing nearby. If you get exposed to poison ivy, you can rub it on your skin and it will stop the oil from causing the rashes. There's also a plant here that has little red stains on the end of its leaves, and the women use it for menstruation. And so there are even these visual cues and signals, and sangre de drago is one of those, because the latex looks just like blood. It even coagulates if you leave it in a cup for too long. And it turns out that it gives our blood the ability to repair damaged cells like nothing science has ever seen before. So, you know, I just wanted to mention that there are these visual hints and clues. Again, we're talking about combining different systems. The great Freemason Albert Pike once wrote that the true scriptures writ large upon the land for those that can see it, right? And so this is one of those things. Synchronicities, I think, are another method of communication via observation of the external world that fall into that category. But so, the Quechua plant vendor says, take some sandi and put a couple of drops of sangre de drago in it and drink it. So how did I just intuit that? And my guess is that I have drank enough of this plant medicine and opened my filters up enough that I have started to receive these signals from the biophotons again. And so I'm able to intuit what plants to combine, how much to combine, and for what sort of issues. I've done it for myself recently and healed some tremendous issues of my own. So back to ayahuasca, because the extraordinary enigma doesn't stop with the fact that people figured out that if you combine these two otherwise, I don't want to say useless because they're not, but you know, plants that make you vomit and don't really do much else, you know, why did they continue to experiment with them? That question gets a little deeper when we look at the biochemical stuff that's going on with ayahuasca and why it works. N,N-dimethyltryptamine, and to a lesser extent, depending on which admixture plant you're using, for example, Chalipanga also has 5-MeO-DMT, which is orally active anyways, but the main psychoactive component that causes the visions is N,N-dimethyltryptamine. N,N-dimethyltryptamine can be smoked, it can be snorted, it can be boofed, if you're a wook. The reason that it can't be eaten is that there's a metabolic salt in your stomach that renders the DMT inactive. MAOs, which the harmala alkaloids in the vine happen to be, destroy that salt and so allow the DMT to work orally. Interestingly, harmala alkaloids are catalyzed in their psychoactive effect by DMT. So we have this sort of sophisticated pharmacological action that occurs when we combine the alkaloids from these two different plants that do almost nothing by themselves, and they become sort of this super psychedelic. Really tremendously amazing stuff. And so, the ayahuasca industry has created a lot of myths around ayahuasca. Unfortunately, when you introduce the profit motive into any ecology, I guess, you're going to have some contamination. And there are levels to how that contamination has expressed. But the main thing is that the perception of tradition and the preservation of tradition have been challenged by the influence of the industry. And so there's a lot of misconception about what actually is traditional. For example, ayahuasca ceremonies involving groups of people did happen with some tribes, but for the most part, it was only the shaman that consumed the ayahuasca. And ayahuasca was not taken to heal anything. According to one researcher, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, the first record of people actually taking ayahuasca to heal stuff themselves is in 1993. It was actually always used to get information, to allow the shaman, it was used to allow the shaman to heal. And there are different approaches, there are different methods, using vibration and sound. It allows you to see the energetic body. It appears as a sort of grid, and you can see places where it's sort of raggedy or maybe it's black, and you can see where it's damaged. And then with training and experience, you can learn to use vibrations, and also tobacco smoke is used in sople, or the true Icaro. This is another contamination. Icaro actually is not an ayahuasca song. Icaro is a Quechua word that means healing through smoke. And so tobacco is actually very powerful medicine. The shuar and the Quechua, but particularly the shuar. When you drink with the shuar, you're taking a lot of liquid tobacco up the nose about every 30 minutes in a lot of ceremonies. It focuses the mind, and it has a lot of different healing effects. It kills parasites. But the idea is that the smoke, the physical reflects the immaterial or the energetic, right? So if you can use it to kill physical parasites, when you're blowing the smoke, you are able to kill non-physical parasites as well. So blowing smoke and sucking through the top of the head, looking for darts, I guess you would say, in the being of the person and removing them, negative influences that have been placed there by some sort of enemy. But the point being that the patient did not consume the ayahuasca themselves until very recently. And of course, there is the influence of the industry again, because it's not nearly as interesting to go to a shaman who drinks ayahuasca and then looks you over and whistles and beats you in the head with leaves and maybe spits flower water on you. You know, I mean, it's a much more profound experience to consume it yourself. And that's honestly where I think a lot of the original motivation for consuming ayahuasca with the patient actually came from. I'm not saying it isn't a good thing, because it is. Our culture is extremely sick. We have so many severely damaged people. We have so much wasted potential. We have a crisis of purpose, which I think is one of the most fatal things that can happen to a culture, right? We don't know why we're here. We don't know what we're doing. We have an existential crisis. And without that sense of purpose and connection, we are listless and aimless. We are gunpowder lost in the void. And so, just saying, I'm not knocking the practice of the patient consuming the ayahuasca. And that was a very long-winded, circuitous, is that how you say that word? Round and round way of getting to the fact that modern research and analysis of how ayahuasca works has actually revealed a whole lot about why it heals people. It turns out that the beta-carotenes and probably all sorts of unknown alkaloids in the ayahuasca vine are extremely powerful anti-inflammatories, and also fight neuroinflammation, which is an extremely powerful impediment to our healing. It affects our cognition. It's just all around a bad thing. Also, as we age, we have our neural pathways are sort of hardening into place, and the longer they remain in position, the harder it is to get them to move again. And that, along with other aspects of, you know, just our aging process, physiological degradation, you know, our memory doesn't work as well, we're less creative, that impacts our level of contentment, our ability to express ourselves, right? So the ability of DMT and the harmala alkaloids to catalyze neurogenesis, which means the building of new neural pathways and actually the regeneration of damaged brain cells, repair, which is something that was believed to be impossible until it was discovered that psilocybin and later LSD, DMT, ibogaine, and harmala alkaloids could actually repair severely damaged, shriveled brain cells. So it turns out that purely in terms of our biophysiology, these compounds have an effect in reconstructing our damaged minds, our damaged bodies, our damaged souls. So when you're consuming these compounds, you're healing yourself on every single level simultaneously. And really it is so tremendous, and the impact is so profound and lasting that it really defies belief. I think one of the reasons that we have struggled to gain acceptance in modern medicine and in the mainstream is not just the old conditioning and the propaganda that psychedelics are just terrible, dangerous drugs that make us crazy and, you know, are just whatever. I mean, you guys have heard all that stuff, I'm sure. It's not just that. I think that the claims that are being made by the researchers now are very difficult for people to take seriously just because they're so extraordinary. In fact, a researcher at Johns Hopkins recently said about psilocybin that it is simply unprecedented in the history of psychiatry that a medicine can cure so many different psychological aberrations, and often with a single dose. So now that we've hit on the subject of research, let's talk a little bit about how it is that the research stopped, because this is another tremendous misconception. And my personal feeling is that this is one of the biggest travesties of modern history, the prohibition of psychedelics and the prohibition or the restrictions on even research on these compounds. A lot of people believe that what happened is that the researchers studied the substances and then they called the federal government up in the United States and they said, these are terribly dangerous, medically useless, we need to get rid of them. What actually happened is that Dr. Humphrey Osmond, for example, who was one of the researchers that was commissioned by the federal government to look into these things way back in the early 60s, said almost exactly the same thing that this researcher at Johns Hopkins said only a few years ago, which is that we can treat every known psychological aberration, paraphrasing, known to man, oftentimes with a single dose. And the federal government's response was, ban them now and shut those studies down. There are videos on YouTube of the researchers actually talking about what happened the day they got those letters that shut it down. They were in the middle of these experiments with LSD, and you know, they were told they had to stop immediately, and it was actually absolutely horrific. Because let's consider the damage that was done by this decision to prohibit the research and use of these compounds. I started to talk about how the DMT, LSD, psilocybin, all of these compounds that we can lump under the heading of psychedelic or entheogenic, even ketamine, they restore neuroplasticity. At Princeton, one of the researchers there said that they had determined that you could restore the learning capacity of a 55-year-old brain to that of a 5-year-old with LSD. And he was asked to summarize his findings with this study, and he said, psychedelics are the most important discovery in human history. And so that neuroplasticity is at the heart of why these compounds are so powerful and why they're so efficacious at curing PTSD, depression, addiction. Ketamine has turned out to be literally a miracle in terms of treating treatment-resistant depression and anxiety. And the reason is this ability to restore this neuroplasticity and to rewire these bad neural pathways. It turns out that our understanding of addiction was entirely wrong, and it's actually not true that if someone becomes addicted to something, as I once was, to opiates due to health problems, that if they ever get high again, they will go on a bender and it's the end of them. It's not true. If they heal the trauma, they're no longer predisposed to that type of behavior. Okay, so long story short, what I'm getting at here is that we have had the ability to treat alcoholics, to treat violent criminals, to treat chronic depressives, to avert suicide. And for 50 years, we have not been able to use our most efficacious tools solely in the interest of protecting the profits of Big Pharma. Okay, so this is something that I think that it's really difficult for us even to wrap our heads around, the extent of the damage that has been done to all of us because of the prohibition of psychedelics. My light just died, so we're going to be in spooky mode for the duration, which is probably not going to be too much longer, but there'll definitely be a part 2. But okay, so that's the you know, the psychiatric travesty. But let's talk about consciousness a little bit, because earlier I referenced the book The Varieties of Psychedelic Experience by Masters in Houston. And they did all kinds of crazy stuff that's in that book. They injected 1,000 people with DMT. And you guys remember, this is 40 years, give or take, before Strassman was once again given permission to inject people with DMT by the federal government. So this was not new. People have just forgotten that we've already been here, we've already been through this, we've known these things for a long time. There's no possibility that suddenly, you know, the federal government's just finding out that they were wrong. That's all complete nonsense. This research has been done, you know, half a century ago. That's the reality. And so just a couple of little morsels, little gems from the Varieties of Psychedelic Experience. The people that were injected with DMT, for example, let me get these stats right. It was of the people that saw God when injected with DMT. So I'm not saying that 99% of people saw a jeweled cat as God when injected with DMT. I'm saying of the people that reported seeing the face of God, 99% of them said that God was a jeweled cat. What that means, you know, no conjecture. But there's all sorts of just crazy stuff in that book like that. But perhaps the most remarkable of these things, to bring us back to the topic of ayahuasca, is that telepathy was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt in like 1963 in these ayahuasca experiments. And because these two doctors were aware of all of these reports from anthropologists, from explorers like Sir Walter Raleigh, Wade Davis, you know, Richard Evans Schultz, of these shaman that are able to read your mind, that are able to remote view and see all of these places that they couldn't have possibly been to in the jungle. You know, they were aware of all this to the extent that harmaline and tetrahydroharmine, harmine is actually lesser, it's not as important, but these two harmala alkaloids were actually referred to or called telepamine and telepathine. Thank you so much. And one more time, you guys, if you haven't hit the like button, please do. We're demonetized. We get no money for these unless you guys make contributions. You can join the Patreon where I do secret streams on all sorts of subjects. And you can make a one-time contribution via the email in the description. I think I also put it in the chat. Excuse me. I'm choking on rape there. Okay, so here's what happened with the telepathy experiments. And it's crazy because they really did prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. And before this is all said and done, I'll tell you guys some of my stories that I've experienced with this along these lines. And they are just mind-boggling. There are no words. But so what they did, because, you know, telepamine and telepathine were the names of the harmala alkaloids back then in the early 60s. I don't know why they were changed. Maybe somebody just thought this is a little bit too much woo for science, so we need to give these compounds a more scientific sounding name or something. But so they wanted to see if there was truth to this. So what they did is they had these drawings that were really, really, really random, abstract, what's up oneness with fungus, abstract, crazy, random juxtaposition of images in order to discourage guessing, right? So one of the pictures that I actually recall was a guy skiing down a mountain that was in flames and there was a UFO, right? So just really ridiculous stuff. and then someone up on the top floor, I'm not sure why they felt the need to separate them by a great distance, but I think they had them like 30 floors apart or something, drank ayahuasca, and their job was to describe these pictures that the person on the lower floor was looking at. And they were like 99% accurate. They, over and over and over again, they had like 100 subjects. They were able to describe this stuff. And it's really not hard to understand how this stuff happens. You know, we're flirting with disaster by, you know, even discussing this stuff in terms of credibility, right? But if we take for granted that we do actually have a reducing valve in our consciousness, and it absolutely makes sense as an evolutionary adaptation, because, you know, if we could see even more than 1% of the full spectrum of light, we would be practically blind. If we could see all of these, you know, webs of energy and oscillating three-dimensional patterns that are actually there all the time, in my opinion, as Terence McKenna said, we'd have an awfully difficult time hunting a deer or driving a car. And so we have evolved or devolved the capacity to perceive these aspects, I guess, of the universe. So if we go ahead and take for granted that that's true, and we know that the brain emits waves and that these waves contain information that can be understood by computers, it's really not a stretch at all to assume that the human mind can pick up brain waves from other brains, and that these chemicals short circuit the filters that screen that stuff out. Because on a day-to-day basis in your normal life, if you were picking up the thoughts of the people around you and the animals and all this information coming in from plants and whatever else, you would be overwhelmed and you would go insane. But to have that ability temporarily is an entirely different story. And so, you know, this is one of the great gifts of ayahuasca, because it is my belief that having this experience of the universal mind, of the greater consciousness, of the oneness of our being in this way, we are healed from our toxic cultural conditioning, from the delusions of our, you know, modern ontological traps, basically, which is what I believe they are. So I am going to pause there because it's been 47 minutes and take questions from you guys. If you have any questions, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the retreats, not too much because I've already made videos, but basically until I think November, it's possible to come and stay for anywhere from 1 week to 8 weeks with our apprenticeship program, and study Hermetic magic and the Western mystery tradition in tandem with plant medicines. And we're having guest indigenous shaman from the Shuar tribe, from the Quichua, and it's possible that there will be others, Kofan, and one of them is a female shamana, which is relatively rare, at least in this area, named Mama Celia. She's an amazing woman. Our Maloka was just, the support beams were just put up today. It's amazing to see this stuff happening. We're right on the Napo River. It's right in the backyard. There are Semitame Monkeys. In fact, I made one of those monkeys famous on accident last year. It has just under the same number of views as the Island Boys. That's how famous this monkey is. I call him Lighter Monkey, and they have learned to steal lighters, and they at first were dragging the wheel to get them lit so they could burn their fur and then eat it. And eventually, one day the tree was wet, and I got it on video, actually. You can watch it yourself on my TikTok. I saw the monkey actually try, and it was too wet, so the wheel was slipping, so it actually lit it, like turned the lighter over, stared at it for a second, and lit it like a human. 20.7 million views. So those monkeys are here. They're semi-tame. They'll get on your shoulders sometimes when you're walking through the park. We have lagoons with 15-foot-long fish that are friendly, sort of like the pink river dolphins. There are caverns caverns. We have Warani people. Sometimes we'll go to the village and visit them. We're going to learn how to make medicinal teas. We're going to learn about Bobinsana and Chuchawasi and Guayusa and all of these different admixture plants, and walk around in the jungle and learn to identify them and learn what's edible. It's really going to be an extraordinary experience. So far, all the people that have signed up are amazing. I'm super excited to meet them all. The energy is already super high. Very informal, definitely not glamorous. This is not yuppie ayahuasca. It's, you know, everything is nice. We have Wi-Fi and electricity and running water and everything, but certainly not rhythmia. So if you're looking for like a pampering kind of experience, this is much more along the lines of like Shuar, where it's kind of intense and almost brutal. Sometimes the ceremonies. Mama Celia will blow unbelievable amounts of rape into your nose, and you will vomit a lot, but it's extremely cleansing and extremely powerful and highly recommended, but it's not easy. You know, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's definitely not easy. So if you're interested in that, you can send an email to the email in the description and come see us. I'm super excited about it. We're only doing small groups too. We only have 4 or 5 available rooms, so that's it. If we had 4 or 5 couples, we might have 8 to 10 people max at a time. So very small groups, so everyone gets individual attention. We might do some traveling to different parts of Ecuador so that we can see the giant San Pedro cactus and malacatos. And we can't, if we want to see Miguel Chiriop, for example, and when you go there, actually, they'll teach you to blow the dart. They'll teach you swara dances, and then at night you drink natem with Miguel. So that's happening. I'm really stoked to meet some of our longtime supporters that are coming down for that. Man, you guys have been amazing. When I was sick, people sent a lot of support, and we never would have made it through it without you guys. And so, you know, now that I'm feeling better, just in time to do this retreat, it's just literally miraculous, and it's because of this medicine. So I want to thank you guys all from the bottom of my heart for spending this time with me. I will do a part 2 where we'll talk a little bit more about the neuroscience. Glutamate has been in the news in psychiatry recently because we have had a very we've had tunnel vision in neuroscience and psychiatry, looking at pre and post synaptic activity of psychiatric drugs, and a focus on serotonergic compounds, and we're moving away from that because they're realizing that glutamate is the most ubiquitous and most potent neurotransmitter. And this is, for example, why they're discovering that ketamine is so efficacious and powerful. So lots more interesting stuff to talk about. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you again very soon.